Welcome to Speidel's California Minute. I'm your host, Catherine Zidane. This week we're covering the voluntary and involuntary administrative dissolution process for non-operating entities. For more detailed information on this and other California tax topics, attend Speidel's Critical California Tax Issues webinar on August 28th. You can get details and get registered at caltax.com. Many of our clients form corporate or pass-through entities and never use them, or the business fails and the shareholders, LLC members, or partners abandon the business. In many of these cases, the shareholders or partners or members do not formally dissolve the entity with the Secretary of State. These owners then receive a bill from the FTB for the minimum tax, plus penalties and interest. In 2018, legislation was passed that allows for administrative dissolution for California corporations and LLCs. As part of the administrative dissolution process, the FTB will forgive outstanding $800 minimum or annual taxes and associated penalties and interest. According to the FTB, the related penalties and fees that will be abated include the following penalties associated with the $800 minimum or annual tax: the demand penalty, the estimated tax penalty, the late filing and late payment penalties, and the filing enforcement fee if the demand penalty is abated. California corporations or LLCs that registered with the California Secretary of State but either never commenced business or ceased operations but never formally dissolved with the Secretary of State's office can apply to the FTB for a voluntary administrative dissolution. This applies to entities that were not doing business at any time after they were formed in California, or ceased doing business and have filed all required returns and paid all amounts due other than the $800 annual tax and associated penalties for the tax years prior to their cessation of doing business, and have no assets. Administrative dissolution does not apply to foreign entities, which are non-California entities that register to do business in California, or California entities that move their operations outside of California. To apply, taxpayers that have been registered for more than 12 months with the California Secretary of State's office can submit either a Form 3715 PC, Domestic Corporation Request for Administrative Dissolution, or a Form 3716 PC, Domestic Limited Liability Company Request for Administrative Dissolution. Before they're approved, the entity is also required to submit all tax returns filed up to the date the entity ceased conducting business in California, and pay all taxes, penalties, and interest up to the date the entity ceased doing business in California. Once a taxpayer receives an approval letter from the FTB, it's required to formally dissolve with the Secretary of State within 12 months. If the entity fails to dissolve after receiving FTB approval, the $800 minimum or annual tax will continue to accrue, and the taxpayer will have to restart the whole process. The FTB may also initiate an involuntary administrative dissolution process for California entities that have been suspended for a period of at least 60 continuous months. Prior to administratively dissolving the entity, the FTB is required to mail a written notice to the entity's last known address, and if there's no valid address on file, the Secretary of State posting is deemed to be sufficient notice, and transmit to the Secretary of State the entity's name and corporation file number. Once the Secretary of State receives this information from the FTB, the Secretary of State is required to provide 60 days notice of the pending administrative dissolution on its website, during which time the entity can file a written objection with the FTB to the administrative dissolution. If no objection is received, the entity will be administratively dissolved at the end of the 60-day period. Speidel's California Tax Letter is a monthly newsletter that will ensure both you and your clients are up to date with California tax law changes. You can get subscription details and download a sample issue at caltax.com under Publications. That's all for this week. Join us next time for another episode of Speidel's California Minute.